This is the Level Up Engineering Podcast, where we talk with some of the most successful engineering leaders who reveal actionable management insights that help you take your developer team to the next level. This episode is brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications from design to delivery with React, Node.js, and Angular. Check them out at codingsans.com.
Welcome, everyone. I am Carolina Toth, and it is my pleasure to have you here with me at the Level Up Engineering Podcast. Every other week, I talk with accomplished technology leaders who tell me a bunch of exciting stuff from their careers. And today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Somer Esat from Blizzard, who will talk to us about guiding engineers in their career paths, for short. I will tell you a bit more about the topic, but before that, Somer, please give us a chance to get to know you a little better. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Carolina, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Somer. I am an engineering manager at Blizzard. Starting with what I do right now, I've been at Blizzard for 8.5 years, and currently I'm the engineering manager on the Overwatch team at Blizzard, which is fun, especially if you enjoy the game Overwatch, which I do. But before that, I grew up in Australia. I did a computing degree in my hometown, and then I always wanted to be a software engineer. Once I figured out what I wanted to do, it took me a long time, maybe until I was 17 or 18, to sort of, put my head together. And I worked in the town that I lived in. That's where the federal government is. So there's a lot of government work there. And so after school, I went and worked in, the government. And I did various roles, working either directly for some of those government departments like the Treasury or in various consulting roles. I figured out that consulting was something that was very fun for me. You can go and work in lots of different places for relatively short periods of time, a year here or 2 years there. And just sort of get the breadth of experience with the software footprint and the technology footprint across the government. But eventually that led me into, leadership and management, especially as I became more senior as an engineer, more experienced. And then, after, around 13 or 14 years, I decided to try something different. And so I came to Blizzard, which is in Irvine in California. And I took on a role as an engineering manager at the company. At the time, that was with a group called Corporate Applications. And that was a lot of fun. We worked on, it was a great team, and we worked on an application called Atlas. And Atlas was an application that they used to support the customer base of Blizzard. And so the fun thing about that is not just, working with, for the first time, engineers in the US. And so, I don't want to get into the subtleties, but there's a lot of differences I found, at least at first, culturally speaking, between, my engineering world in Australia and in America, but perhaps that's, for a different time. But, that was sort of interesting. And then on top of that, we had this sort of interesting, directive, which was to build this application. And this application talks to all of the different systems there. And so it was an excellent way to get broad exposure, actually, to all of the different aspects of systems at Blizzard in terms of the games and the back-end systems and everything else. So I did that for 1.5 years. And then the opportunity opened up on the Overwatch team. And then I applied for that as the engineering manager position. I went over there and started there. I think it was in September of 2015, and I've been there since then. And it's been an interesting ride. I think, we're going to talk about, what the role is and everything else. But at the time when I joined, their previous manager had decided to move on to one of the other teams. And I think, there was still a little bit of the question of whether or not the role was valuable or not. And I think that, like many different things that people perhaps, aren't sure of or aren't clear on, it takes time to understand those things, to sort of experience it, and to sort of, like form an opinion of, well, is this useful or not? And so early on, it was very much the balance of adjusting to that new role, the new team, the new way of doing things, learning about how games are made as well, because that was important, because building, an application, versus a game is two very different things. And so, that was a learning experience for me as well from the beginning, because I hadn't worked on a game before. But fortunately, they were open to the role and open to me as well. And, it was the first, period of time was spent getting to know everyone and getting to know the team and the way the team functions, and, all of those different things, how games are made and so on. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And then since joining, that's what I've been doing for the past,
7 years, it sounds.
Or so, yeah. I guess I could say that I'm quite familiar with the position now after that much time. And it's been a roller coaster. I mean, we have a lot of ups and downs, and that's just part of engineering, I think, and just in general, trying to come together with people who are passionate about making things, and then trying to do the best that we can. And so, that always involves up and down, and just, making mistakes and learning from these mistakes and trying to be better and so on. So from my perspective, yeah, it's been a fascinating ride, and I've really enjoyed every moment of it. Yeah, that's basically, that brings me to, I guess, today.
Thank you for sharing about your background. I think that really gives all of us a little bit of perspective. You were sharing about yourself, and the question that immediately came to my mind when you said you applied for the position within the team was, who was the one who supported you when you were making this decision? Can you give an answer to that?
It's a difficult question to answer, because there are a lot of people in my life, obviously, family and others who are supportive of me. But I guess I'm the type of person who, I figured out at some point, maybe after I finished university, I figured out that there is a formula to these sorts of things with respect to desire, right? And so if you desire something, hey, I have a goal. My goal is X. And this isn't rocket science, everyone sort of who's thought about this knows this, but, it typically comes down to, hey, I want to do this. Okay, how do I achieve that? What's involved in achieving it? And then what are some practical first steps I can take to get there? And then how do I move forward from there? And an example of that was, at one point I was, a Microsoft certified solution developer, which at the time was the premier sort of certification. It was MCSD.NET for, a Microsoft developer. And that was my background. I was in the Microsoft stack, mostly, VB, C# and those sorts of things. And, there were 5 exams that were necessary to do that. And, you sort of look at that and it's like a mountain in front of you. But, obviously you break things down and you take it one step at a time. And eventually, suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, I just finished the last exam and I got it and I'm done. So in this case, I saw the game, and they had sort of made it available to, internally, right, just to folks working at Blizzard to get initial feedback, right? And so this is when, in 2015, when I sort of first saw the game itself and had a chance to play it, and I fell in love with it immediately. And so I was very motivated to get involved. I really wanted to help, whatever I could do to help. Hey, I want to help these guys out. And I don't remember how, but somehow I noticed that they were looking for this position. And so I decided that I wanted to apply. And when it came time to preparing for that, I spoke with, my director, I suppose, at the time. And first of all, there's a courtesy. You have to let them know, I suppose, that you're thinking about this change because it has some impact on, my existing team, of course. And then, we sort of talked about it a little bit, but to be honest, it was in my world at the time, at least anyway, I didn't know anyone who was developing games. And so, where I grew up and the places, where I had been before I came to Blizzard, there were no game studios there, and nobody was involved in making games unless they were doing it as a hobby on the side or something like that, at least to my knowledge. And there may have been a studio, but I don't think so. And so it was never really an option in terms of like a career path or anything like that. And so because of that, I also didn't know anyone in my circles of engineering that had worked on a game team or knew about making games or engineering on a game team. And so from my perspective, I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it, to be honest, because I didn't really have any idea about how the team functioned or what they were looking for in the role. I had a job description, and so I spent time looking at that. I spent time looking online, obviously, to see if I could find, information about other people that had spoken about being an engineering manager on a game team and so on. But ultimately, I just kind of went in there with good intentions and good faith, and my experience behind me a little bit, and it was a long process. There were, I think, 11 or 12 interviews, and they wanted me to really speak to everyone on the team, as all the leads, at least at minimum, of the engineering leads, the technical director, the production director, and other various folks, the HR person, and so on the team. And so I actually started to learn a lot about their expectations and the team throughout the interview process itself. I think the most difficult aspect of that interview was with the technical director, and they were a person who, as I said, was sort of still sizing up the role and the value of the role and so on. And so that was an interesting discussion, but it was all fun, and I really actually quite enjoyed it. And fortunately, they enjoyed talking to me as well. And so it was just sort of lucky, I guess. And so, we had good conversations, and I must have said the right things. And then, they wanted to move ahead, and that was how it happened.
Here you are.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that one was a little bit more luck than anything else, because I wasn't really able to prepare too much in terms of someone sort of coaching me or helping me through that process. By that point, I had done a reasonable amount of hiring and recruiting and other things, so I kind of knew how to approach interviews and what people look for in terms of the recruiting process. But it was new ground for me, something out of my comfort zone a little bit. So that was fun. It was good. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. It almost sounds like you were, maybe that's too strong of a word, but it sounds like you were co-creating the position somewhat. Throughout the interviews, you were also figuring out what they were expecting of you, and they were also getting to know you and figuring out how you can be a value add to the position.
Yeah, I think that that is true. You're the use of the word, maybe you think it's a little strong, is correct. I think it took a couple of years to start to really dig deeper into that and to really find the finesse, like the right, just the right touch there in terms of how the role can be most effective for the team in the way that they work and the way that they like to get things done and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you. That gives us a really great segue into me mentioning again today's topic, which is a mouthful: supporting developers on their paths to level up and guiding seniors' choice between an IC or a manager path. And with that, it sounds like our first key takeaway is that you shouldn't beat yourself up, because sometimes it takes a couple of years for you to actually fit into the position or to grow into the position. We sort of touched on this in the beginning. Please tell us a bit about your position right now and how it supports engineers and how you are in engineering?
Okay, so my position is what's my title? Senior engineering manager. My position is the engineering manager on the team, on the Overwatch team. And so the role itself is interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because the engineering manager role has different incarnations depending on who you talk to, which company you're referring to, and so on. There are multiple definitions of what this is, and in my opinion, or at least in my world, let's say that in my world, that definition is very specific, and that is that it involves supporting the engineers and the engineering department. Okay, and so at Blizzard, actually, we call this role in some cases the department manager role. And there are versions of this for art, design, engineering, production, and so on. And so I've seen in other cases, engineering manager could be like the manager and technical lead in one. It could be manager, technical lead, and product owner in one. And all these different sort of incarnations of like how to sort of combine, managing and leading a team. And in this case, the engineering department at Blizzard on Overwatch, it's reasonably large. There are around about 65 individuals or so, and so it's not a small team. It's not a 10-person team. It's quite large, and so it requires structure to manage effectively. And there are different sort of schools of thought around this as well in terms of how to approach, structuring a team with respect to how you run the team and manage the team and lead the team and so on and so forth, including all the way up to no structure at all and just having, anonymous contributors doing whatever they want and, things just magically happen. But in our world, that's not the case. The way that we approach this is through the manager and lead and technical director. They form the sort of leadership structure of the engineering team itself. We also have the concept of sub-leads and other things like that. But generally speaking, we have the technical director who's responsible for the technical implementation and direction of the game itself. So they're the owner of the engineering side of the game. And then we have various leads, and those leads are broken up into, they're sub-teams that focus on different areas of the game, the engine, the gameplay, tools, reliability, server, and so on, UI and whichever sort of specific area you want to, organize around. And then within each of those those sub-teams, there is a lead and then some individual contributors. Okay, and so there's a tools lead, there is a server lead, an engine lead, a graphics lead, and so on and so forth. And the idea is that in my role as engineering manager, I work with the engineers on the team, the leads on the team, and the technical director to help make sure that engineering is humming along. It's functioning well. We're able to get things done. People feel supported. The needs of the team are addressed in terms of recruiting or, career development. Obviously, we're going to talk about that and other aspects. And so the role is very much a support role. It's a supporting role. And one where, in my sort of estimation, it feels like my success hinges on the team's success. If the team does well, then I do well. And that's basically the way that I look at it. And so the question is, how do I support the team such that they can do well?
And it's a great question. How do you? Honestly, I mean, I feel like that's
I was afraid you were going to ask me that.
That's the meat of the project, right? And to me, it sounds like you are, I feel like this is so personal, but it sounds like you're a caring person who understands the business value behind caring for the engineers and making sure that they feel like they are cared for. But if you could give us maybe a couple of examples as to what you do on a daily basis, I think that might shed some light on how we should all care for engineers.
So primarily my role involves talking to people. And that may seem odd, but really that's where a lot of the focus of the role is. Speaking to people, hearing their achievements, their concerns, understanding, what they need in order to be successful in their role, or the things that worry them, or, and so day to day, what this looks like is I spend time in meetings with folks, like one-on-ones, for example. I gather information. I share that information with, for example, the lead, and we talk about how that information might be useful to us in terms of managing and leading the team. That information might also be useful for the technical director for a broader or more strategic level of thinking. And then ultimately, there's also the broader team itself, the game team. And so sometimes as I talk to people and gather this information, it can be helpful to share this information with the broader team as well. For example, it may be that, generally speaking, and this is the benefit of this role. This role requires, at least in my incarnation of the role, it requires that you speak broadly with folks. And so you get a broad picture of how people are feeling, what themes are, what themes have developed in the near term, with respect to, for example, it may be that there's general sentiment that whenever someone is getting up in front of the team to talk about work that they're doing, it's very positive, because they like to know about challenges that others are going through. One of the designers came up and shared information about, this new thing that they're working on, and it's not ready yet, but they shared some of their challenges and what they're thinking about. They asked for feedback. And so that can be a valuable thing. It brings us a connection to that person and their work and so on. And so it brings cohesion to the team. It brings, awareness and so on and so forth. And so that could be, a positive thing like that might be, could be broadly discussed, like in these one-on-ones, for example. Hey, besides, we talk about the work that they're doing and how things are going, but, is there other things they might share? They might share that kind of feedback, like, hey, I really appreciate when folks get up in front of the team and share those things. And then I can share that more broadly. So that maybe I can go and tell the design lead, hey, design lead, I heard from my group that, people really appreciate, folks getting up in front of the team. And this may seem far from, career development and engineering management and so on, but it can be as sort of squishy as that in the sense that, the things that make people excited to be at work and enjoy themselves at work and feel comfortable and happy to contribute could be, even things like that just, hey, I feel a connection to the team. I'm aware of what's going on and so on. And so part, a large degree of ensuring that the department runs well is understanding where these, things are and how we can sort of encourage them to continue or find areas where things aren't going so well and then, encourage, figure out how we
them
can
to go better.
Yeah. So that's a large part of my job, talking to people. Another part of my job is recruiting. And so that's important as well because we're always looking for talented folks. And so, we have our career site on the website and people come and apply, or we have sourcing that goes out and talks to people. And there's a recruiting department who is, excellent, who supports us. And so, I work with my recruiter and then we're, day in, day out, there are various different activities going on there as well. And so finding the right folks on, and hiring them and bringing them onto the team is also very important. We're very busy. We have a lot of work. We often need, new folks to help us out. There are open positions, lots of open positions. And so that takes time as well. Other examples of day-to-day, mostly as well, chatting with leads. I catch up with leads once a week. And so the broader team maybe once a month to once every 2 months, depending on how fast I can get through. But with leads, it's weekly. And so, you sort of work through the week, you catch up with folks, and then you're sharing information, chatting with leads, understanding what their challenges are, what they're trying to achieve, sharing information with them about their teams as well, and so on. And the approach that I take is usually I I do a sub team a week. And so, this week I was chatting with the server team. And so I chat with the server team. And then, at the end of that, I circle back around with the lead and chat with the lead. Hey, everyone's doing fine. Oh, there's, concern here, the question here, this came up there. Maybe we should try this there, and so on. So there's a significant partnership aspect to this role. It's a partnership with the engineers, a partnership with the leads, and the partnership with the TD. And at each level, the TD is the technical director. At each level, there's a shared sense of, a shared sense of commitment to a successful outcome. So when I chat with an IC, how can I help them be successful in whatever it is they're trying to do in terms of their day to day, right? How can I support them? When I talk to a lead, it's the same thing. It's I need to help support them, but also how can we help them be successful in terms of their team, and how they're leading and managing their team. And then when I speak to the TD, how can I help the TD, be successful in managing and leading the leads, and also just the engineering department overall. And so at each tier, there's sort of different sort of scope and considerations that apply. But ultimately, the theme is the same. How can I help folks be successful in, what they're trying to achieve in terms of their day-to-day role?
I love that. And with that said, I think you made it sound like with your role within recruitment, that's also sort of like a career progression kind of role, since the people who are joining should be satisfied with whatever they are doing when they come to the company, and also they should fit as much as they can and also bring as much new ideas or as many new ideas as possible into the existing company. And since you sound like you are the one most in touch with like the pulse of the engineering team, you are one of the best people to talk to if they are unsure or if they don't know if they're gonna fit. So let's talk about something specific. What if there is an engineer or there is a lead? I will leave it up to you if you want to share a story or if you want just to think about this as a thought experiment. But what if someone expresses to you that they are feeling like they're ready to move on to the next step in their career development? What are some of the steps that you take to help them?
So that's a great question. I think it's so we spend a lot of time, especially with new hires, but just in general, making sure that folks understand the expectations and the definition of each of the different levels as you progress through your career. And a couple of years ago, I led a strike team to actually define or redefine, clean up, I suppose, what those definitions were. And that was, that was very helpful, because it's important to have good clarity around what is expected of me as an associate engineer or as a mid-level engineer or senior engineer and principal engineer and so on. And so generally speaking, if we've done our job reasonably well, folks have some at least awareness of the definition of these roles and what is expected. And then ideally, as they do work and as they do things, the way that we approach this is that the lead, works with them day to day. They do their code reviews, they prioritize their work, they assign work, and, just sort of being a lead, I suppose. And so they start to form a picture of where this engineer is in terms of their career development. What are they capable of? Where are their comfort? What are they comfortable with? What are they not comfortable with? And so we try to give feedback continuously. That's important. And we also try to assess, or just naturally, I guess, we assess continuously as well. And as things happen, it gives us information, it gives us data to respond to. that could be like something happened and we need to give feedback, or something happened and we notice, hey, that was great. They're really doing well. That's consistent now, et cetera, et cetera. And so when someone feels that they're ready to progress, it's often not in a vacuum, in the sense that, hey, I feel like I'm ready, and then nobody else knows what's going on is very unlikely. And so when that happens, and this is quite common, especially with, sort of more on the junior side, they're very interested in understanding, how do I get to the next level? And to be clear, this isn't everyone. Not everyone is sort of geared around that mindset. Some folks are very sort of driven by that. They want to sort of move up, and for many different reasons. It could be for recognition, the title, money, etc. There's lots of different sort of reasons why folks might be, pushing in that direction. But there are others who are a little less, or significantly less concerned. They're just, they're excited to be there. Give me work. I want to do work, and, so on and so forth. So it depends. But for folks that, to get back to your question, are sort of feel that they're ready for the next level, we always encourage folks that ownership of your career is important. You own your career. You should be the one to bring up these discussions, to engage with us. And if you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine. We're very experienced doing this, and we recognize when folks are growing, and we will, recognize and reward folks as they progress through their career, as best we can. But the first thing to do there is to really engage and say, hey, I feel like I'm doing a great job. How do you feel about, what is in your mind about how do I get to the next level, and so on. And so we always come back to, to first principles, the role definition itself. What are the expectations at the next level? Let's look at that. Let's understand that, and let's see how, you fit in. And so that's not a checklist, to be clear. That's a very sort of general definition that could be differ depending on who the lead is and who the manager is and so on. But it sort of gives you a sense of like what the expectations are. And so recognizing where this person is with respect to, the next level and how they're progressing towards that next level is important. Helping them understand if there are any sort of concerns that are there and so on. And this is a thing that I like to do in partnership with the lead, because the lead often has the ground level awareness of, where things are at. And it's really more in the case of, like, for example, situations where if a person's generally doing well, then both the lead and I have a very clear picture of how things are going. We've talked about it. There's data there to discuss and share and so on. But there are sometimes situations where, for example, an engineer may disagree, right? And they may say, hey, like, I believe I've mastered this. I believe I'm ready for the next level. And so that's where, we need to be a little bit more sensitive to that and careful, and just recognize their concerns, understand, where they're coming from, and then, sit down and sort of talk through that together and, figure out where we're at. And it's important because, if we're not careful about how we, do this, we need to make sure that we're equitable in our approach and fair and balanced across the team. We need to make sure that we're not setting anyone up for failure as well. And so if we promote someone too early, for example, and then the expectations are significantly higher beyond their level of comfort, then, maybe we set someone up to fail. And so ultimately, it comes down to conversation. Let's talk, let's understand, how you're feeling, what's in your mind, and so on. It can be difficult as well, especially when we know that a person is absolutely ready for the next level. But there are processes in place and other aspects that sort of relate to that mean that we can't just promote someone on the spot, for example. And so there's a process that needs to be adhered to, and so that can take time, and patience is required. And sometimes it can be difficult to say to someone, "Oh, absolutely, we guarantee that this will happen." It's hard, and that can be hard for folks, especially people who feel very strongly that they're ready and want reassurance. They want reassurance, and sort of they base decisions around those sorts of things. And that can be challenging. That can be very difficult.
Do you want to share a little bit about your process that you mentioned? Like what engineers, for example, need to do to move to the next level, or so that other listeners can learn from your process in this sense?
So the simple answer is do work. But obviously it's more complicated than that. And so the idea is that at least within our organization, we have the expectation that we have these levels, and then we have the expectation that an engineer can, meet the expectations of those levels. Not, perhaps not every single thing, but to a reasonable degree and at a fairly consistent level. And so the way you do that is you do things to demonstrate that you have the necessary skills, right? And so some of the skills may be, that you're able to, reasonably estimate a piece of work, right? So that's a skill that's, challenging to teach, right? It takes knowledge of the code base. It takes an understanding of yourself and how long things take you to do, and, what sort of things you need to look out for that may, get in the way of you delivering things and so on. And so that can be a hard thing. It takes people time to master the subtle art of estimating things correctly. And so it may be that, the expectation of the lead is that, yes, this person is progressing well. However, there are, a couple of areas that they still need to work on. And so the way that you approach that is you recognize those things and share that feedback and talk about it. And what's important there is that when you give this feedback, for example, we can say to someone, hey, your estimates need to improve, or your communication needs to improve. Well, that's great, but what does that mean? Oh. And so I've seen examples of where we've said these things to people in the past, and they've said, yeah, I understand what that means. Be better at estimates, or be better at communicating, or whatever, the things that we're saying to them are. But in reality, they have no practical sense of how to go about doing it. And so I think it's very important not only to identify, with help from the lead, where are the areas where perhaps this person has opportunities to grow, but also practically speaking, how does that happen? And then talk about it with that person as well. And so, the idea is that you are assigned work, you do work. As you do that work, things happen, you make mistakes, or, things go well or they don't go well. And that's just engineering. Engineering is hard, it's challenging. And so, there's often things to talk about when we do work, and so the idea is that you do work, and then once that work is done, you take a moment, retrospect it, think about it. How did it go? What went well? What didn't go well? How would you approach things differently next time, now that you have the hindsight? And do that with your lead. Sit down with your lead, ask them their opinion. What do you think went well? What can I do better next time? And so on. And so there is a reasonable approach to that. You're assigned work, you do the work, you retrospect the work, and then you explore, and then out of that maybe comes some action items. So next time, hey, let's try this, or I'll help you with that next time, or for sure this worked well, so let's keep doing that. And then so through this process of iteration, which figures largely in game development, but through this process of iteration, you can also iterate on your growth as well. And so you iterate on your growth, and as you go along, you start to master certain things, and then new things will come up as you do harder things or bigger things or more challenging things. And so it never ends. And so through that process, we continue to grow. And so the key there is that you need to have, a supportive lead who is paying attention to what you're doing, and you're also paying attention to what you're doing yourself. And so when you come to these, retrospectives to discuss this thing, and to be clear, this isn't a broad retrospective. This is you and your lead, maybe. And so, this is where you sort of bring your innermost thoughts about how it went, and try to be honest about it. Hey, I really feel like, this part of it went great, but this part was terrible. It really didn't go well. And here's why I think it didn't go well, and how I think maybe next time I can do differently. What do you think? And then there's an opportunity there for some coaching from the lead as well.
Awesome.
As you do that and as you iterate over that, over time, of course, you start to master certain things, and things are less of a concern than they were previously, or less of an issue than previously. And so incrementally, you move forward. And eventually you get to the point where, like you sort of mastered the expectations that we have for a person at your level, and you're exceeding those expectations on a regular basis. And once that happens, and you're feeling confident and comfortable, and the lead feels the same way, for example, and they recognize this, then the person is ready. And so often as that happens, and especially as you start getting a little more senior, you start to recognize that moment, and you yourself will understand and know, along with your lead, hey, I think I'm ready for the next level.
I love that. Thank you for making the summary, because I was just gonna say, if I understand correctly, there are the tiers or levels for engineers and for managers, and they are written down like a specification, like this is the kind of behavior that you need to go around with. And then you need to be open to feedback from your direct manager or from everyone, basically. And you need to be able to introspect and see whether or not you are behaving in such a way that is correct within that level, or it's better than what the expectations are. And then you also need to be able to talk about it, and maybe not just introspect, but be open about your findings, and as you said, retrospect about what you have done and how you are going to change for the better in the future.
Yeah, it's sort of this incremental growth. And so I do want to say one thing, like there's no correct way of doing this, obviously. Like I think correct is sort of an interesting term, but over time, you start to get a sense of, at least specific to perhaps our team and the way that we like to do things in terms of engineering and development, what type of things work well and what things don't work so well. For example, let's just say that, you estimate a thing and, the estimates don't play out well. Okay, and so you retrospect that and you say, all right, well, why didn't it play out well? Oh, well, there was all this discovered work. I didn't understand the feature. Maybe I didn't take the time to think about it at first. And so there's no correct way to solve that, but there are things that you can do to improve your chances. And so this is where the lead might say, all right, well, when you're estimating things, maybe, consider, coming up with an initial idea and then talking to some folks, some of the more senior engineers, get their perspective. Ask the person who's most familiar with that code base, hey, I'm implementing something here. You know this code base. What do you think of my estimates? Are they reasonable? Solicit input and feedback. Ask your lead. And it's not cheating. It's, sometimes
it's
people feel this way. They feel like, oh, I have to do it myself. Otherwise, I'm not going to be attributed with the achievement. And that's not true. The best way to do these things is to what Tim Ford used to call an engineer on our team, tapping the brain trust of the room. And so there are a lot of smart people in the room, and they're very willing to help. And so, sometimes it just requires a little bit of extra time to solicit that feedback, and then you have a chance to get some input and maybe improve things and make them better. So it's sort of not so much the correct way of doing things, but more, hey, this has been done many times over, and by experience we know that, using these different approaches can yield a better result.
Yeah, I could have chosen a better word. That was incorrect of me to say correct. But I do think that there are many ways to correctly do a thing, and they're all gonna be good, and then some good solutions are better than others in a given set of circumstances.
Totally.
But I didn't mean that there is only a single version of behavior that's gonna help someone.
No, and to be clear, the reason I clarified that is more because I had, defined, like I had talked about our role definitions, and I wanted to be clear that, this isn't a checklist, or, it's not that we expect everyone to take exactly the same approach. There are different ways of doing these things that could equally bring success. And so, it's important that we are clear on that, because we don't want to have the impression that, everyone is expected to behave in exactly the same way, and that's not the case at all. Of course, humans aren't like that anyway, but it's important because we're not looking for, we're not looking to sort of make a production line of engineers here. We want people to be imaginative and creative and use their own flair and judgment as they approach these problems. And these are just a different set of problems. Because engineers love problems, of course, and problems could be like, well, how do I load some data in a file, or how do I, shave off a few milliseconds off the sim, or something like this, like engineering type problems. And then there are problems with respect to how I get my work done and how I work with others and so on and so forth. And so being a developer encompasses, in my definition of what a developer is, encompasses all these things. So the team is made up of developers, and developers, they do things like engineering, for example, but they also need to do other things like talking to people, or like collaborating with others, and knowing when they're going to go past a deadline so they can surface that to the people who make decisions around timelines and other things like that. So there are lots of different aspects that go with it as well.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're very cognizant about creating an atmosphere where fuzzy around the edges isn't a problem. What immediately came to my mind was like, you do work with engineers, so maybe fuzzy around the edges isn't their cup of tea to begin with. If you could share a little bit about that, like, do you hire for people who are, everybody's trying to hire for people who are more, solution oriented and aren't stuck to a single set of tech stack or some technologies, but like, what are some of the, in your opinion or experience, what are some of the precursors to the kind of mindset that you're looking for? Or how could you describe the engineers who are more okay with this kind of flexibility?
I think it takes experience to get there, and a little bit of confidence as well. And so the scope within which I work is excuse me, the scope within which I work is the engineering team itself. And so it's a very specific environment that has a specific set of, you'll sort of, like, we're doing work within this environment. And so in the context of that, I think that it's possible to build up, a degree of confidence in your role. You're confident in the code base, you're confident in the way the team works, you're very familiar with things. And so as your familiarity and confidence grows, then, the flair and the flexibility increases as well. And so I find that, for example, when we hire a very junior engineer, they're quite malleable because they're not sure, they haven't made up their mind yet how their style should be or how they should approach things. But they're also very unsure. And so for folks like that, we tend to provide very specific, guidance. All right, work on this thing. When it's done, let me know, et cetera, et cetera. And so depending on the individual, but generally speaking, you're sort of paying a little more attention to that. Maybe not micromanaging, but just sort of, just being more supportive, helping them out, reviewing their code more often, helping them understand why we make decisions the way that, we do, and so on and so forth. And then, as these folks grow, they have role models around them. Okay, so this is very important. We encourage people to do this a lot. Look at other folks around you, more senior engineers especially. How do they approach problems? How do they approach, communication and other sort of aspects of their role? And use that as a basis to help you understand, how more senior folks, more experienced individuals do things. And so it may be that when they first start out in their career with us, for example, it may be that within our environment, they're quite supported, and it's a very sort of curated and sort of careful environment, recognizing that, hey, let's not throw them in the deep end. Let's, support them and give them guidance, give them some victories, and, help building confidence and so on, as well as recognize where are their strengths and weaknesses and, growth opportunities and how we can help. And then as they become more senior, again, like you start to develop a sense of how the team functions. Often, the more junior engineers, their focus is like this, like what's in front of me, what's my task, and so on. And then as you become more senior, it's the expectation, but it sort of happens naturally as well. You start to sort of broaden your perspective, and suddenly you're sort of, these things are things I can do without, too much trouble perhaps, but, I also have enough sort of brain cycles to, to consider what's going on around me and think about how this work intersects with other work, what the bigger picture is, and so on and so forth. And so that transition as well can sort of lend itself to the, a better sort of sense of fuzziness around the edges, as you called it, like you can sort of, you feel comfortable in your environment, you're a skilled and professional engineer, and you can, apply your knowledge and experience to do amazing things. And, on our team, we encourage that. We're not a top-down team where we tell people, hey, like even at the most senior levels, hey, this is what you're doing, do this. It's more like, hey, here are some goals we need to meet. If this interests you, great. Or, hey, we need this done. I know it's not your favorite, but, we need to get it done. So there's different flavors. But it's more about, independence and ownership and, like just developing a sense of, expertise. You can go and do these things without too much, we don't need to sort of be there every step of the way, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. What I gather from what you said is that for juniors, you kind of need to pay more attention and give them more specific feedback and more guidance and coaching in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I want to jump into the great divide from individual contributor to manager, and how you kind of made that transition, because if I am not mistaken, you did make that transition from individual contributor to now talking to people, which is great. It's just, I work a lot with junior engineers. I feel that from their perspective, it sounds like it's not the same kind of job. And it is not the same kind of job, but both jobs are necessary for successful products to be delivered and developed. So how do you help people who are maybe in this divide, or they're thinking about this divide?
So it comes up fairly regularly, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, it is important. I mean, one thing that I haven't mentioned along this way is I take a lot of time to ask questions and hear responses from people in terms of their career. What would you like to do? What interests you? What excites you? What are you passionate about? The more junior engineer often doesn't know. I want to try everything, and they'll try everything. And then as they start to form an opinion about the things that they enjoy doing or prefer doing, then perhaps they'll go deeper and specialize and so on. And then at some point they'll feel more comfortable in what they're doing, and then they'll ask themselves, what does leadership look like? What does it mean to be a lead? And am I interested in that? I'm a good engineer. I feel like I'm, a success. I've been successful. I'm senior. In terms of career progression, there's the principal track, which is an individual contributor, and then there's the leadership track. And so the question comes up because it's a part of their career progression. Which way am I going to go? There's a fork in the road. And so, it's often a question that's easily resolved, because most people will be very sure. Usually the ICs are very sure they don't want it. They don't want to be a manager or a lead. They enjoy coding too much, and they recognize early on that there's a a balance there between, as an IC, you're doing more coding, and as a lead, you're doing less coding. And so some people feel strongly about that. I think it's important that you understand the motives, right? Because sometimes people don't have a good sense of what they want or why they want that. So, for example, you might say to someone, "Hey, you mentioned to me that you're interested in being a lead. Why do you want to be a lead?" And they'll say, "Well, I want to make all the decisions." And it's like, well, that might be a good reason, but maybe a lead involves
that's not what you do.
That. And so, maybe they're describing to you a world where they're responsible to make all the technical decisions. So they want to be maybe a tech lead as opposed to a lead, and they have very little interest in the people side of things. It's just more that they're interested in ownership of the tech so they can drive the direction of the tech in one way or another. And that's fine if that's a role on your team. We don't have that kind of role. The role that we have is as a lead is the lead is not only responsible for aspects of the technical direction because they own the tech, but also they're responsible for their team and the people on their team as well. And so there's a little bit of a crossover between what I do and what they do as well, because they're responsible to manage their team as well as lead their team as well. And so they spend time talking with their people and coaching them and giving them feedback and so on. And I partner with that lead to help them do that. So that's the way that a lead is designed, that the lead role functions in my world. And so if a person is interested in that crossroad, they've come to the crossroad and they're curious about it, it makes a lot of sense. It's quite obvious to then spend some time talking about, well, what would the future look like in each of these roles? If you were an IC and you went the principal track, here's what, the focus would be and how that looks. This is the engineering level description for it, to help you understand. And then for the lead, this is how that looks, and it can be quite different. And so I think that's a good starting point. And then if we establish that the person, if the person feels that they're interested in that, perhaps unsure, but interested at least, then you can do other things to start exposing them to aspects of what that role is. Perhaps they could spend time with their lead in areas that they normally aren't involved, like in planning. Like, a lead is involved in planning work for the future, for example, and so that's an aspect of their role. Maybe they'll spend time in meetings with the lead, where the lead is offering technical direction or guidance with, on various different things that folks are working on. Or perhaps we would organize some kind of training. And so there is different types of training that you could do to go and get a taste of like what leadership feels like, what some of the concerns of a lead might be in terms of like how they should think about, the people, or how they can manage well, and, not to make, not to sort of how to be a good lead, right, for example. And so there are different types of trainings that are available. And sometimes people will go and do those trainings and they'll come back and they'll say, it's interesting, but it's sort of not really for me. And then there are others who go and they say, well, I love it, and, I'm so excited for this, and I really want to learn everything that I can. What books do you recommend? And, I want to do more. And so, yeah, that's sort of that initial sort of, excuse me, that exploration.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I am really getting a lot of value out of this, but I am sort of trying to put my finger around it. So
sure.
If you could give us maybe some specific skills or qualities that can help someone notice if they should go in the manager track or in the IC track. Let's say that we are in an ideal position of I am open to both, and I am a pretty great engineer and I'm pretty great with people, but I haven't been able to decide what my next big step should be in my career.
So if they say to you, would I make a good lead? They say, I want your opinion. Do you think I would be a good lead? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because I think that some people feel that they wouldn't be a good lead, but then they have a chance to try that and they actually make excellent leads. So there's no real sort of formula as such to say, oh, this person would or wouldn't be. I think patience is important. I think patience is always important, but certainly as a lead, it can be. Empathy is also very important. So the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand their perspective. And, being an engineer who becomes a lead, obviously you have an understanding of the challenges that you go through as an engineer. And so as a lead, you can sort of understand what some of those challenges are as you think back, on your career as you grew yourself. And so I think, like if I was to answer that question for someone who was asking me, I would say those sorts of things: patience, empathy, and a desire to, you get a sense of achievement or accomplishment or satisfaction out of helping others. And so that's not just leads. Other engineers enjoy helping others as well. But if you're more excited to deliver a solution as opposed to help another person deliver a solution, then maybe, that's something to think about there, because the lead often is not involved in anything that's critical path because they're busy in meetings and other things. And so assigning them work like that can be dangerous. And it can also, be not a good idea for the lead as well. It might put a lot of pressure and so on. But I think, it often comes down to, what motivates you. Is it, making features for the customers or the players, or is it, helping others do those things? And so if the answer is the latter, then, perhaps, that's an interesting and good choice for you, because, that's what a lead does. They enable their team to, to do work, to meet their goals, to get things done. And so sometimes that can be a very clear distinction for folks. Other times it can be a little bit of a challenge. And I've actually worked with leads who continue to find that challenging. Oh, I feel like I'm not adding value. I'm not doing anything tangible, and so on. And that can be that can be the other aspect of it is, well, when I do work, I create something. And so that's tangible. We can attribute my effort to the creation of this feature or whatever. But when you're working with others and you're helping them, it's quite invisible sometimes. Like they were able to achieve the thing and they did well, but it was your guidance perhaps that gave them that extra piece that enabled them to be successful. And sometimes that's not even clear cut even to you. Sometimes It could just be a nudge here or a nudge there, and then things play out well, but it wasn't clear whether or not you actually helped them or not. And so,
sorry, excuse me, but you are there to pay attention to maybe more aspects than just a lead or just a manager, and give the critical kind of feedback about those moves.
Right. I mean, well, yeah, I mean, yes. Although, that, again, that can be very hard to recognize. And ultimately, that's why I say, like, if you're successful, then I'm successful. And that covers it up. That basically covers it, right? Like, it's sort of like the catch-all. Because, and how do we define success or whatever? That's a different story. But generally speaking, if we're able to get things done and things are reasonably, well done, then we were successful. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there are folks who want to be a lead but are a bit worried about whether or not they will like it, and they're also worried about whether or not they would be good at it. And the only way to really find out is to do it, of course, because everyone is different. But there are things that we can talk about and explore that may help you, make your decision. But one thing you definitely have to make peace with is, without a doubt, you will be doing less coding day to day as a lead, at least in my world, on my teams and so on, than you would be as an individual contributor, because your time is spent, in operation and support of the team.
Okay. Thank you. If you have a story for us about coaching someone or helping someone decide between these two choices, or someone who actually tried out being a principal or a manager and then decided to not do it, how did you handle the situation? How did they handle the situation? I think that could be a high note to end the conversation with.
Okay. So I think I'm actually going to answer this with perspectives from a couple of different examples that I'm going to use to help me answer this question. And so, like individual contributors, leads also need support. And so one thing that I did, one thing that we do with leads is, we have this concept of leadership coaching, okay? And so, when a person, especially when a person becomes a lead for the first time, or as a new lead, they're very unsure of the approach that they're taking. I don't like telling people what to do. I'm uncomfortable with that. We were peers, but now I'm their lead, and that's uncomfortable, and so on and so forth. How do I manage this situation? A person came to me and said they're unhappy about X or concerned about Y. I'm not sure how to advise them. What should I tell them? How should I tell them? Do I have to watch out for anything? And so these are all sort of common things that happen as a person makes that transition into becoming a lead. And so, from these examples that I've drawn, these were some of the more common sort of things that happened where a person was excited to be a lead, and they had done some of the training, and they had even done some mentorship. And so this mentorship, like they're a senior engineer, and then they had a more junior engineer, and we wanted to make sure that not only that person had an opportunity to mentor someone, but also, establish a second owner, right? So we de-silo, and we reduce we introduce some succession as well. And so in doing so, that engineer was able to work with this other engineer for a period of time, and, over that time, not only transferred knowledge to them, but also was able to guide them and help them grow in their career to become a better engineer. And after that, or as that sort of drew to the point where they were applying for leadership positions and then ultimately became a lead, it helped cement within them the idea that, hey, I enjoyed that. That was something that was, rewarding for me. And I'm very proud of, to say that I was able to coach this individual and help them grow, and and now they're on par with me in terms of their skills and abilities as an engineer, in this code base. And so, it was a very sort of comfortable situation from that perspective to move to sort of shift from there to being a lead, at least from my perspective. However, fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? These are all within all of us, a sense of imposter, like imposter syndrome and so on. And so when this person actually became a lead, they really, I guess, felt a lot of that uncertainty, in a significant way. And it was very stressful for them, and they were very, concerned that a decision went poorly and the team reacted badly, or they didn't approach something well, and so on and so forth. And so, and those were real things, but, as you work together with this lead and the team, it's important that you're supportive of everyone. And so helping the other engineers understand on their team, hey, this is a new lead, they're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. It's okay for anyone to make mistakes. We're learning, and we're new at this. And, I'm here to help. So, if you have concerns or you feel like, something could be done better, then you come and let me know. And then at the same time, I told, that's with the individuals on the team. And then as I speak with this lead, we take time to, hey, make sure you're paying attention to the areas that go well and don't go well, write them down, bring them to our one-on-one to discuss, and let's talk through them and spend time to analyze, hey, how did it go? What can we do differently or better? How do you think you could have done this differently, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's value as well in bringing leads together to talk about their craft. And so this is very important because, there are always going to be leads that have more experience than others, and so on and so forth. And so, that's a good source of support as well. And so we organize leadership coaching labs where we'll get together periodically with the other leads, and we'll encourage folks to share leadership challenges. And so we can talk about it and analyze it and discuss it. How could we do it differently and better, and so on. And so when we do that, not only are you able to share some of your concerns as a lead, as a new lead, even as an established lead, and share things that perhaps you feel like you want input and feedback on, but also you hear the challenges that other leads have, and you recognize that you're not alone. And so this is important as well, because as a lead, you go through these challenges, but all leads, share in those challenges to one degree or another. And just knowing that, like others have a challenging engineer on their team, or went through this problem where, something happened and they had to deal with the fallout of that. It can be very, valuable to understand that there are others in a similar position that you can seek advice from and get input from, and so on. And so leadership itself becomes, to a certain degree, a little bit like engineering itself. So as you engineer, you're making features, you do the things, you retrospect on it, you talk about it, and then you look for areas to improve. And you can do the same thing with leadership as well, where you talk with other leads and or the manager, myself, for example, and you ask questions, figure out how to do things maybe a little bit differently next time. We'll try that and see how it goes, and so on. And so the only difference is that leadership is interesting because you deal with humans. And so when you deal with humans, it's always going to be unique in different situations that come up. And, obviously lots of the similar things as well, but there's always going to be some interesting, unique challenge that comes up that, makes it a fun thing to, an exciting and challenging thing to overcome or to deal with. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a really beautiful kind of final words, because you made it into a pattern as to how you can look at it as another kind of scale that you use and improve within yourself. Go on.
Yeah, there are so many aspects to this. It's difficult to generalize and it's difficult to quantify it down. Like you talk about leads and their focus on enabling their team, for example, right? But leads also operate in a larger ecosystem as well. There are other leads, and collectively the leads are responsible for aspects of the thing that we're making, the game, for example. And there's also a technical director. So how does that play into it? And so as a lead, you also have responsibilities to the broader picture, how your team is helping, other teams be successful as well. And then also how you as a lead are interfacing with the technical director and the other leads to make sure that we're managing the engineering department and leading the engineering department in a cohesive way. And so there's sort of managing up and there's managing down. And so, these are all sort of aspects of leadership that come into play as well. And for new leads, the focus should be the team. Let's get into a good place with the team. The comfort is with the team as well. A place of comfort with the team. Understand how work is done. Understand how we plan. We prioritize. We scope. We push back on things. We, etc. Just to make sure that, everyone is well, cared for, and, we're able to get work done successfully. And then once there's a degree of comfort there, that's when it gets even, like you add the extra layers of like, well, again, like, what's the broader ecosystem look like? And that's not exclusive, obviously, like it takes time to, you need to sort of consider those things as soon as you start being a lead. But then there are also even broader things you might think about. Like, for example, if I'm a tools lead, how should tools leadership function at the company itself across all teams? And so there are opportunities there as well as you sort of continue to sort of, learn and grow as a lead as well. How can you contribute to leadership more broadly in that sense? So anyway, I think it's important to recognize that this isn't an exact thing, and there are many different aspects, and those different aspects may also be governed by the areas of interest that an individual has themselves. Where are they passionate? What aspects of the role are interesting to them? Some leads are very excited to be involved with recruiting, others not so much, even though obviously it serves an important function. Some leads are very technology focused. They're technologists. They love solving problems, and they're very engaged in the various different technical challenges of their team. Others are not so much. They're more interested in the broader picture. How are we organizing? How are we planning? How are we serving the needs of others? And so on and so forth. And so, yeah, it depends. All the leads I work with have different sort of variations of this. Some like to be on top of things a little bit more in terms of their ownership. Others are a little more, I trust the team and I want the team to handle these things. And I don't need to worry about it unless they come to me and tell me that there's a problem. And so there's no right answer is basically what I'm saying here. It's just, you sort of feel it out. We have an existing structure here, and it's like when you're an engineer, you go into an existing code base and you have some reference to go by, right? Like, there's a certain format and structure and architecture and so on. Well, the same thing applies in terms of, these roles and levels within the team as well. So it's a similar thing, like there's a flavor of leadership that we have on our team. And you can sort of take it as much or as little of it as you like, but there's a base level of expectation that certain things, need to happen, and then beyond that, it's up to you to sort of do these things. And I love that because I think it sort of brings some variety to my perspective, like to my role, but it also, it's just fascinating that there are some leads that are very sort of that they're differing leadership styles that apply, and there's no sort of one way that these things are done, and they're all equally successful, and each have their challenges as well, but they're all equally successful. And so part of that relates to a supportive environment, and to that I pay some respect to the to my role, and then the role of the technical director and the role of the leads as a leadership unit that's responsible for that. But again, the fuzzy edges apply, as you said, right? And so you can still be in that context a lead with fuzzy edges and approach things in different ways, and that's fine.
Thank you. I think we have covered a lot of ground. We are very much approaching the end of our time, and and there are just, to me, it almost sounds like throughout the career progression of an engineer and that might be true of everyone, not to be, it's close to 8 p.m. here, so I might be getting a bit too spiritual, but it sounds like as an engineer starts as a junior engineer, their perspective is very narrow, and they don't know what they want, so their plate is entirely full, but they can only pay attention to a small chunk of their plate at a time. And then and correct me if I'm wrong at any point in this, but as they progress in their career, they start being able to comprehend a larger chunk of their plate at a time. And then even if they stay on the principal track and become a principal engineer, they will do the same kind of opening up your perspective within technologies and architecture and more kind of full stack development that leaders do within leadership. They open up to more people skills and supporting people and figuring out how those people fit in the entire ecosystem of the organization. Would you say that is kind of correct?
I think so.
Or I don't want to say correct anymore.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, again, it's easy to generalize, and of course, we're talking about humans, and people are everyone is different. But if we were to generalize, I mean, that's over the years, that's basically been, the experience that I've had in terms of, how folks join, grow over time, with the right coaching and so on, and then eventually reach, a principal level, or become a lead. And there are very
Just
good.
to,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry, yeah, go.
go on.
I was just going to say there are very good examples of engineers who have started as interns and have become quite senior, and it's fun to sit with them and recognize that growth as well. And the journey that they've been on. And hey, think back to when you first started. How did you feel versus today? And it's like night and day for some folks, just in terms of their knowledge, their experience, the mistakes they made, the bad code that they wrote, and all the rest of it. Versus and everyone feels like when they look back at their code, it's terrible. And what was I thinking? But yeah, it's a very rewarding experience to see someone go through that. For me, speaking personally, and there's a lot of pride in it. And if along the way we can also do good work, that's sort of the icing on that cake as well. And so there are things to be proud of and things to look back at and say, here's what we achieved together as a team, or here are the things that I did that I'm proud of, and so on. And it's all within that framework, that sort of nurturing framework of hey, come onto the team, learn how to be a developer, and we'll support you as you go through your career.
Thank you very much. We have covered a lot of ground, and some keywords for me for patience and empathy and being supportive, and not to be taken aback by fuzzy around the edges, but maybe embrace the differences between people. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you would like to add to our conversation today?
I think let me think about this for a second. I think the role of an engineering manager is an important role. And I think that to a large degree, it's relatively underutilized in the industry. And I don't have any data for this or figures or facts or anything like that, but it's just my impression as I look around the various teams and even like externally to different definitions of what an engineering manager is in different companies and so on and so forth. And from my perspective, and I'm biased, but I feel like if you have the luxury of having an engineering manager that's configured in this way, then you're doing your team a big favor. Because if you want a team that can be stable and happy and all those things, there are a lot of different factors to that. And I'm not just attributing engineering management to it. You need a strong vision, and you need good values, and all these different things that apply to making an environment a great place for people to do amazing things. But the role itself, I think, is very it can be a very powerful addition to help a team be healthy and be successful. And so, from my perspective, I think that it's important that, and this is something I'm thinking about, is sort of codifying this a bit better, and bringing a little bit more awareness and understanding to, what that role is, why it can be important, how it complements the existing leadership in terms of the technical leadership, and so on. And, an interesting question that comes out of that may be, for example, you might say to me, well, do you have to have engineering experience to be an engineering manager? And so a lot of people may ask that question. And I think the answer is no, you don't. However, I think that you can be, you'll have a significant advantage if you do. Because there's a degree of shared experience that goes with that empathy that you were talking about earlier, that really can only be expressed if you've been through those trenches and done those things. And so you know, the key here is that in all of this, we're working with people. And when you're working with people, you know, humans have things that happen in their lives, either within work or outside of work. And those things are important because depending on how we feel, you know, it can mean, hey, I'm excited to be at work, or I'm not so excited to be at work, or I'm happy with how this is going, or I'm not happy with how that's going. And these things are all things that we have to manage as humans. There's our emotions and our feelings and so on and so forth. And with the absence of a role like this, it may be true, and it's not always the case, but it may be true that there is no, it can be hard to find an outlet for those sorts of things. And there's a nuance there that applies. For example, if an engineer reports to a lead, and that engineer is frustrated with the way that that lead is doing their job, are they going to be comfortable to go and tell that lead that they're unhappy? Maybe yes, but maybe no. And especially if you report to the person, that may affect your career or, you know, your progression, and so you may hold back. And so, you know, as things happen that in your life and in your work and so on, you may find yourself isolated and unable to, you know, share those concerns with a professional, you know, associate, right? So maybe you can talk about it with friends and family, but not so much in the professional context. And so part of the value of this role, first of all, is that when it's set up in the way that we've done it, for example, all the engineers report to me. So they don't actually report directly to their lead, they report to me. And in fact, I myself, I don't report to any of the leads or even the technical director. I report to what used to, well, it's now a different role, but I report to a person who's responsible for the department managers. Previously, it was to the production director or, you know, the executive producer, but now there's a person on the team whose job it is to, you know, look after the department managers. But this gives me the freedom and the flexibility to express myself and also support in a way that doesn't bring a conflict in terms of their, you know, in terms of my career development and in terms of the individual or even the lead's career development. And so even the leads report to me directly as well, and they have their dotted line relationships with their technical director or their lead, depending on who you're talking about. And so what I'm saying here that's important is that this role can bring a level of human, you know, of accessibility of humanism to the role. I don't know how else to better express it, but that's sort of what we spend our time talking about. How do you feel? What, you know, like what concerns do you have? How can I help you that's not specific to the code that you're writing? You know, like, is there anything that I can do for you? And so that's the importance of what this can bring to the table. And I want to be clear, it's not mutually exclusive in that, like, sometimes people have those types of conversations with their leads. Even if they report to their leads, they're still comfortable in sharing those sorts of things. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm just saying in general, generally speaking, you know, this provides that additional degree of support. And that's what that support means. That's what it's all about, is understanding, you know, the challenges and concerns and issues and things that are going on in the lives of humans who are here helping us to you know, get things done. And the more important aspect is, you know, these are our employees. They're, you know, they're people. You know, they're not just resources. They're people, and so that's really, really important. You know, because if you don't if you're not mindful to that, then, you know, you might as well have robots working with you, and perhaps or you know, like, just you know, it just sort of it can make things difficult for folks to be settled and comfortable.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think that is a really great closing to our conversation. Where can our listeners follow your work?
Well, I don't know. I have a Twitter account. It's just my first name and last name. So twitter.com/Samarasat. I don't tweet all that often, but if people have questions for me or they want to get in touch or chat about things, then I'm always happy to chat with people. So you can get in touch with me there.
Thank you very much. So, dearest listeners and watchers, today my guest was Somer Esat on the Level Up Engineering podcast. He has more than 8 years of experience at Blizzard Entertainment. Now he's a senior engineering manager at Overwatch. And he has shared quite a bit of his experience with us today, how he helps and supports engineers and leaders within the company and within his team. I thank you for joining us today, and I thank you for this really awesome conversation. I think we have all something to take away from it. And I am Karolina Toth, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks for staying with Level Up Engineering. If you enjoyed this podcast, so will your friends. Share this episode on your favorite social networking platform. To stay up to date with our content, follow Level Up Engineering on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast. Brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.